Hi everyone. I decided to get back into producing vlogs or video blogs and populate my YouTube channel once again. So decided to go ahead and start this week. And what I'm going to do is probably just translate a lot of my blog material that I maintain over at easylogistics.tech into video format and then drop it into my channel. I may even just recustomize my YouTube channel solely to discuss logistics, the larger fields of transportation, and supply chain management. So I may end up just doing that. Seems to be the format of choice lately, and I know a lot of people are more prevalent to or more apt to comment on YouTube than they are in someone's individual blog. I have been in a couple discussions on my blog, but the traffic's pretty low, so thought I'd try out YouTube and see what happens with that. Try to discuss some of the things that are relevant in today's difficult and challenging economic landscape. And I thought that I'd start this week by discussing carrier pricing amid a pandemic. So let's go ahead and dive in. In this era of increasing congestion, resource backlog, and limited driver availability, carriers are adjusting their pricing models, and they are correct to do so. More importantly, carriers have an opportunity to develop their business model while simultaneously developing strong relationships during today's unprecedented challenges in the industry. Let's first discuss the framework within which carrier pricing is based. So let's back up. I know it's kind of a controversial topic, carriers and adjusting their pricing models. It's always been a source of contention within the industry, but as of late, I think it's a little bit more appropriate for carriers to not inflate, but to adjust their pricing models and to accurately assess all expenses that they've got in order to incur or to offset their costs, because they have a responsibility to stakeholders as well. So it's important, and we'll discuss more about the larger context, but I think we do need to start by discussing the framework within which carrier pricing is based. So cost to serve is a financial metric that is used to detail the costs incurred by carriers, which include specialized services provided to a shipper or customer. So very common in the industry, CTS, it's a critical tool as it does help accurately assess the charges based on the unique circumstances of each delivery. And that's from the point of origin to the destination. So that includes the delivery, the return, and all the different expenses that are incurred along the way. So inputs can be varied, and it can be complex, and it can be unique and dynamic. So inputs include things like highway, road, and terrain characteristics. So moving freight through Arizona is a lot different than moving freight through West Virginia. Moving freight through southern Florida is a lot different from moving freight through Minnesota, especially at the time of the year. And so all these different planning considerations get a vote, and they help build a larger picture that cost to serve will help represent. So CTS can be expanded to follow an activity-based costing methodology, which employs process mapping. And that's where it gets pretty interesting. So you kind of take it up a notch. The process mapping mostly involves capturing the specific packaging, labeling, loading, and unloading tasks that are performed in the performance of a movement. The process mapping can also include administrative actions such as invoicing, form preparation, and even frequent client communications that complex movements may require. As a result of the process mapping, all expended resources are then computed and linked to each specific task or activity. So that'll provide the required data needed to build a very accurate invoice. Cost to serve metrics that follow an ABC methodology are obviously the preferred model for carriers to use, as transportation services are most often multimodal, which can vary considerably. We know multimodal can get highly complex, and there's just a myriad of factors to consider that need to be allocated in the cost metric. And so carriers should be doing this anyways. They really should be. But I think it's important to understand that these are the common tools in the industry. And if carriers weren't doing it before, you can count on the fact that they certainly are now. So it's not that they're trying to do, they're not price gouging at this time, but they're just following their due diligence and making sure that all costs incurred are allocated on the invoice. Other operating expenses, which are not always captured, may include things like excessive driver wait times, and we're going to get into that, and excessive container handling, which contribute to overall workflow stagnation. Carriers should employ innovative strategies that capture data from drivers and material handling crews in order to appropriately adjust invoices. Unfortunately, these examples barely scratch the surface of additional carrier expenses incurred during the pandemic-induced supply chain congestion. Labor shortages, quarantine expenses, testing expenses, and government-imposed travel restrictions all have placed excessive demands on carriers, which significantly impact the cost of doing business. So all these things are really important, and it's becoming very competitive. Not competitive, but it's becoming very difficult for these carriers to keep their head above water, and also because they were not bailed out. And I will use the airlines as an example during the CARES Act. So the CARES Act does not recompense commercial carriers for economic fallout they may have experienced as a result of this pandemic. So you can see right here, that's on the U.S. Department of Treasury website, the Airline and National Security Relief Program. So they got bailed out, because the airlines were in trouble. So the Fed came rushing to their assistance. $25 billion, a mere $4 billion for the air carriers, for the cargo air carriers. But the passenger lines, $25 billion. In response to industry-specific challenges created by the pandemic, the following programs were created for Treasury to provide assistance to passenger air carriers, aviation contractors, national security businesses under the CARES Act. So we know that the CARES Act funding was largely appropriated for, but what did it cover? It covered individual citizens, large corporate bailouts, as you see right there in front of you with the airlines, state and local government response solutions, which, very, very good reason for CARES funding to be allocated or earmarked for, and then public health systems that may have been overlooked. So there are a lot of public health out there that does not have a direct funding stream, and the CARES Act is meant to cover down on those, which those are good areas, of course, and would never complain about a public health system or a state and local government response solution. But some of these airlines and some of these large corporate bailouts are just kind of, in my opinion, they're BS. But I digress. I got off the point here, and that is that the carriers were not recompensed for any economic fallout that they may have suffered as a result of this pandemic. So I don't know, maybe the reason that carriers were not specifically named in a language may be due to the fact that the original draft of the bill was passed way back in March of 2020, before carriers felt the full impact of the current supply chain crisis. So maybe, I think that's one of the reasons carriers are justified in adjusting their price models to assess additionally incurred expenses more adequately. And they're not cheating, they're not gouging, they're just accurately assessing all incurred expenses. So one of the more common occurrences that are being experienced industry-wide over the past 18 months to 2 years, are extended driver wait times. So the detention fee is one example of an added fee that is assessed to compensate for excessive delays in the loading or unloading of a truck that may prevent the truck from being used for other transportation services. The detention fee is already an established penalty that historically has not been well received, but should now be recognized as part of a standard pricing model. The standard protocol for carriers is to grant a 2-hour grace period for shippers to load freight and for receivers to unload freight, When loading, unloading exceeds the 2-hour grace period, a detention fee is assessed. It's important to note that the driver is also being detained, and at a time when driver shortages are a serious constraint for carriers. The detention fee can therefore be assessed along two distinct cost activities, one for the truck that has been detained beyond the 2-hour grace period, and one for the driver that has been detained beyond the 2-hour grace period. This may sound like an aggressive gouging tactic, but it is actually a legitimate way to assess two cost activities that are linked under one operation. Furthermore, it is a carrier's responsibility to their stakeholders to cover costs and ensure profitability. So you get an idea from this example of the enhanced reporting and recording now required as a result of the cost of doing business during a pandemic. What do you guys think about that? Do you think that that should be two cost activities? I'd like to hear from you in comments down below. So you can see that image right there. That's from the Los Angeles port. So you can see those trucks backed up right there. They'll spend 24 to 36 hours awaiting a load. That's not uncommon in this era. So they're not making money. The carrier's not making money. And so everybody suffers. For a little bit more historical context, as an aside, the Staggers Act and the Motor Carrier Act of 1980 were deregulatory acts that opened up transportation pricing for carriers. This created a highly competitive environment for carriers, which ended up benefiting shippers by reducing rates by the mid-1980s. Shippers also saw specialized services being provided as a result of the competitive environment that had been created. Ultimately, this deregulation allowed for the pricing models that include additional fees necessary for carriers to remain profitable in today's challenging environment. Newer pricing models shouldn't be one-sided though. While pricing itself may be firm and fixed, there are tools that carriers can use to better accommodate their customers during these difficult times. So it's got to go both ways. Carriers that have the capital reserve should build trust and establish short-term value for customers without sacrificing price points. Flex-in pricing is a strategy that would offer flexible payment terms and/or credit for future commitments. Other flex-in pricing features may offer bundle service packages that forego the scrutinized itemization for multimodal movements. Fixed rates are another tool to use for well-established customers that may be experiencing financial hardship. Fixed rates can be applied for all pricing models temporarily. For an example, for application maybe during financial year crossovers, Q4 for example. So account managers should work closely with their clients, one, to confirm the hardship, two, define the value-added requirement, three, find a strategy that serves their client while preserving the margin, and four, establish the time-sensitive terms. These are the strategic strategies that strengthen customer relationships and secure future business because they demonstrate understanding and loyalty. An ancillary benefit of this difficult era is that carriers are forced to refine techniques and strategies to remain profitable. Best business practices are being developed and data is driving decision making once again. As we turn the corner on this pandemic and begin a return to normalcy, we are likely to see many aspects of our industry operating at peak levels of proficiency as a result of all this hard work and refinement of process. So I just thought I'd throw this in here at the very end, and as you can see from this chart here, which was provided by the National Motor Freight Association, FMTA, nmfta.org, you can see that just a skyrocketing price to ship a container by vessel from 2019 to 2020. So you can see that's December 2020, and it's gone up from there. I mean, we were down around, what, $1,600 to ship a container by vessel, and now we're well into the 4,000s, I know. So we've more than doubled that. So good website right there. So for regulatory information and guidance, you can visit the NMFTA website, nmfta.org. And NMFTA is not a government agency, but they are an advisory council that maintains commodity classifications and provides guidance to carriers, shippers, and other stakeholders. So I've enjoyed this discussion. I've kind of went over my allocated time there. I like to stay right between 10 and 15 minutes. I'm over 15 minutes right now. So I'm going to cut it off. I look forward to comments and discussions below. Next week I will jump in again, and I'm going to hit another topic in logistics or possibly supply chain management next week. You guys have a great week. Stay safe, and I'll see you below in the comments.